Hi guys, and welcome back to Astral Cognition. Today, we're continuing our series on the Myers-Briggs type indicator. We'll mainly be focusing on the perceiving functions and how those are connected, but towards the end of the video, we'll be discussing how the positions of each function affects its expression. This will be the last video in our series on MBTI, and as always, links to the timestamps for whatever we cover today are in the description.
Let's first discuss what a perceiving function is. Perceiving cognitive functions try to describe the ways in which we gather information from the world. It represents things that we are more likely to remember and what we tend not to notice in our lives. There are two types of perceiving functions: sensing and intuition.
What is sensing? A preference for sensing means that an individual primarily relies on their sensory experiences. These individuals are more inclined to perceive the physical world around them, unlike intuition, which perceives the metaphysical.
Let's delve into sensing variants. Introverted sensing, often abbreviated with a capital S and a lowercase I, is just like many other introverted functions. SI is extremely good at remembering sensory and physical experiences. For example, an SI user may remember important dates as well. They may also remember in vivid detail a certain experience, and some SI users are actually able to remember really small details like the strength of a female co-worker's perfume.
Sensing's other variant is Extraverted Sensing, or SE. SE is a receiving function, which in this case will mean that instead of remembering one's own physical experiences, SE users will remember the experiences of others. They are keenly aware of the world around them and can be good with creating physical objects. For example, they may be great woodworkers, or they might be a thrill seeker as well. While SI was more about one's own sensory experiences, SE is looking outward at the sensory experiences of others.
The second perceiving function, intuition, is a little harder to explain. It conveys information about the metaphysical world, which essentially means it focuses on the world of possibilities and connections. For example, if a sensor and an intuitive had a conversation with the same person, the sensor might remember the clothes the person wore, where they had the conversation, and the things they spoke about. The intuitive would most likely remember any beliefs they gleaned from the conversation, whether the person could be a close friend of theirs, and other potential problems or benefits a relationship with the said person may have. The judgments these people make would be based on different aspects of the person. Sensing would provide a physical basis of judgments, while intuition would provide a metaphysical one. In short, intuition always allows to see different possibilities.
Introverted Intuition, or NI, is all about one's own future, which allows them to hone in on the one future that they really want. You'll often hear an NI user say, "I want," and that's because they have already decided what future they want to obtain. NI is laser focused on one possible future, and this is why it's often associated with willpower.
Extraverted intuition explores the intentions and possibilities of others. Being a receiving function, extraverted intuition, or NE, is capable of seeing the potential of others around them. And if powerful enough, the individual can see many different possibilities or different outcomes of someone else's decision. NE tries to find patterns in the world around the individual, however, like the NI, which would find the patterns in one's own life. This is why they will often say, "You could," because they are expressing just one of the many possibilities available.
So how are the sensing and intuitive functions linked? The sentences for this may sound a little off this time, and that's because the way we perceive things isn't as clear-cut as how we make decisions. You have to remember that we don't often verbally state the way that we perceive the world around us in a way that's direct. Instead, our perception molds the words we use in a certain way.
So on one end of the spectrum, we have someone's desire to have a specific future, or NI, but the patterns that NI is gathering is also based on the external world around them, which is SE. An individual wants to do something because they know someone else has experienced it. Thus, NI and SE are linked together.
On the other end of the spectrum, we have our own sensory experiences, or SI, shaping the way we view others' futures. Using NE, one can see the same pattern of events that led to a specific outcome in their personal lives in the lives of others. So an individual can know what another person should or shouldn't do because they can predict the outcome for that individual. Now let's discuss how the position of each of these functions affects the way you express them. Everyone has all 8 functions in their psyche, but the first 4 in any type is what we consciously use. The last 4, when used, tend to result in negative experiences both for others and for oneself. We'll only be going over the first 4 functions on this channel, but if you want to learn more about yourself, there are some sources that I've linked down in the description that you can use to start your research.
The first function in everyone's psyche is often called the hero function. It is essentially the function you're always using. You don't really notice it because you do not know how it's like not to use that function. It is often called the gateway into the ego. But when someone else complements your first function by having the other variant of it, you will automatically like that person more because you will get along pretty well.
Of course, the positions themselves are also linked. The hero function is linked to the 4th function in your ego, the inferior function. The inferior function is where one's fear resides. This means that, for instance, if you have introverted thinking as your inferior function, you will be scared of being labeled stupid or dumb, since TI is all about one's own logical reasoning. However, since the inferior and hero are linked, this means if you have an inferior TI, you will automatically have FE as your hero function. If you're a bit confused on the links between the judging functions or what they even are, check out our previous video in this series for a refresher.
The second function in everyone's ego is named the parent function. It acts pretty responsibly and often regulates the hero function. For example, having extraverted intuition as a parent function will allow someone the ability to warn others about the potentially bad outcomes, whereas an E-hero would be able to see the good and the bad outcomes. An E-parent would focus on mainly the bad things that could happen in order to rein the hero function.
The second function is linked to the 3rd function in everyone's ego. Often dubbed the child function, the 3rd function in everyone's stack is often very aspirational and filled with this childlike wonder. Using our example from earlier, if you had extroverted intuition parent, you would have to have introverted sensing child, since those 2 functions are linked. SI child is enamored by one's own past experiences. Those that have SI child often love to tell stories about things that have happened to them. The child function is very positive about itself, so SI child will remember many of the good things that have happened to it. But just like in real life, a bad experience can really harm the child function. SI child will always remember anything bad that's happened, but it won't dwell on it. Instead, it'll serve as a database for the parent function to rely on in the future. For other child functions, if presented with a negative scenario, it will often trigger or even strengthen the parent function.
Another thing of note, when you are figuring out your cognitive functions, 2 functions of the same variant cannot be next to each other. For example, there is no type of an E-hero and an FE parent. The reasoning behind this is that if you have one functional variant that is presenting itself positively, the other function of the same variant must also be positively expressed. And the same is true with negative expressions. So if one person has both NE and FE, both of them must have the same expression.
In addition, you must have 2 perceiving and 2 judging functions in your ego. This is a little more self-explanatory, but if you prefer one way of perceiving and or judging the world, you are effectively poor at the other end of that spectrum. A person, for example, can't be inherently good at making both moral and ethical decisions unless they develop themselves over time and acquire that other skill. This applies to every single function.
This video marks the end of our overview of Myers-Briggs type indicator. Knowing yourself is an important part of knowing how will you go through the creative process, so we encourage you to do your own research on the topic if you'd like to learn more about yourself. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and as always, we will see you in the next one.